In every approved Marian apparition, Our Lady carries a specific mission, a message crafted for the hearts and needs of her children. She doesn't wait for us to be worthy. She steps into our mess, like she did on the barren hill of Tepeyac, where her radiant beauty touched a nation's blood-stained ground. She came not as a distant queen, but as a merciful mother, a healer, a restorer of all who are broken in body and spirit. She came to a people who were once mighty, strong, proud, invincible. But now they were broken-hearted. And into their pain she spoke the words, "I am your merciful mother." Just think about that. In those few words she revealed her message of compassion, her solidarity with everything within us that is weak, humbled and shattered. She doesn't hold back. She spares nothing of herself. Not her garments, not even her very being. It's an extravagant act of love, a love so complete that it wraps us in her arms, draws us into the folds of her mantle and holds us close. Right there in her embrace, she gathers every fragmented piece of who we are, every wound, every failure, and unites them in love. And here's the thing, no one is excluded, not the sinner, not the outcast, not the one who thinks they're beyond saving. Her love reaches every heart. In her arms there's solace for the weary, strength for the weak, and hope for even the most dejected soul. That's who she is, that's what she does, and it changes everything. It's overwhelming to grasp. The Queen of Heaven walking among wounds and despair, placing her feet where false gods ruled and hearts lay shattered. From the very beginning, Mary's role has been to gather up what is broken. But it's not just a role, it's her heart. Think about it. At the Incarnation, Christ took on all of humanity's brokenness, and from that moment on, Mary carried it too. In Bethlehem, as she held the tiny, vulnerable body of the infant Jesus, she wasn't just holding her son, she was holding us. Our fragile, wounded humanity was right there in her arms, wrapped in that first embrace. But then brokenness didn't end there. The Eucharist, the body of Christ, shows us this reality in every Mass. Blessed, broken, given. It's not just the bread, it's us. Each fragment is a piece of his mystical body, a reflection of all the ways we fracture ourselves, cut off from God, from one another, from love itself. And here's where Mary steps in. She doesn't stand apart from the mess. She walks right into it, into the isolation, the pain, the fear. And what does she do? She gathers. She pulls every broken piece of us into the folds of her mantle, into the crossing of her arms. She doesn't just hold us, she offers us to her Son, because that's who she is, a mother who never stops gathering and caring for her children. And then, on a cold December morning, she steps into the life of a humble man named Juan Diego, who is caught in a moment of uncertainty, just like we are at times. Mary asks him to approach the bishop, to request that a shrine be built in her honor. Simple enough, right? But then, when Juan Diego asks the bishop, he's met with skepticism. The bishop demands proof. And now Juan Diego is stuck. He's confused. What's he supposed to do with this doubt and disbelief that's been thrown his way? So he returns to Mary, unsure of what to do. And Mary, in her tenderness, doesn't scold him for his doubt. No, she tells him, "Climb, my son the littlest, to the top of the hill. There, where you saw me and I gave you orders, you will find different flowers. Cut them, gather them, and bring them to me." There it is, a simple task, almost like a test of faith. Nothing grand or extraordinary, just a little obedience. She doesn't tell him to go change the world or perform miracles, she just tells him to gather flowers. Go, trust me, I'll show you the way. Juan Diego, still unsure but trusting her, climbs the hill again. He finds the flowers blooming where they shouldn't be, unexpected and beautiful in the cold. He cuts them, gathers them, and carefully places them in his tilma. There's something so human about Juan Diego scrambling up the hill with his tilma full of roses. We see ourselves in him. eager but clumsy, trying to bring something good. When he opens his tilma, it's a tangle of flowers, beautiful but disordered, crushed, imperfect. And what does she do? She smiles, takes the roses into her hands, arranges them and gives them back, more beautiful than before. My son, the littlest, this diversity of roses is the proof and the sign which you will take to the bishop. It's such a tender image, isn't it? Because how often do we, in our desire to follow God's will, charge ahead only to find our efforts messy and incomplete? We mean well, but our spiritual nearsightedness twists the order, blurs the direction, and complicates the good we're trying to do. Yet Mary doesn't get frustrated with us. Like with Juan Diego, she meets us in the mess, rearranges what we've brought, and transforms it into something greater, something more beautiful than we could have ever managed on our own. That's her way, not to demand perfection, but to perfect what we offer, no matter how broken or disordered it may seem. In mysticism tradition, the flowers, as Pope Francis reflects in his homily on the feast day of Our Lady, represent virtues that God plants in our hearts. Not achievements of our own making, but gifts of grace. And in gathering those flowers, Juan Diego reveals what God asks of us: to accept his gifts, no matter how fragile or incomplete, and let them transform our reality. Mary's words to Juan Diego, "Am I not here, I who am your mother," take on even greater significance in this context. They're not just words of comfort, they are a promise that her presence remains imprinted on the fabric of our lives, on the tilma of our hearts. Just as the flowers perfumed the humble cloth, so too do the virtues God instills in us transform the poverty of our small gestures into something far greater. These virtues, the simplicity of small acts of love, become the radiant image of a church that, like Mary, carries Christ in her womb. We may not always realize it, but through Mary's hands our disordered offerings are reordered, our brokenness is made whole, and our weaknesses are infused with God's strength. Just as Juan Diego's humble tilma was illuminated with a vision far beyond his understanding, so too are our lives marked with God's grace, quietly revealing his love to the world. We end where we must always begin, with Mary. She doesn't just see us, she gathers us. She doesn't just gather us, she transforms us. That's what makes her presence so extraordinary. She steps into our brokenness, not to condemn or criticize, but to restore, to renew, to lead us back to her Son. And isn't that what we all long for? To be held, to be loved, to be made whole again? It's easy to forget this in the noise of life, to think our small acts of love, our quiet prayers don't matter, but they do. In God's hands they are virtues planted in the soil of our hearts, gifts we didn't earn but are invited to share. Mary shows us how to gather these gifts, how to let God's grace perfume even the weakest parts of who we are. And as we let her guide us, her words echo in our hearts. Am I not here, I who am your mother? She is here, always, gathering us into her mantle, covering us with her love and leading us to Christ. Thank you for choosing to grow closer to holiness today. What a beautiful journey you're on. If this reflection spoke to your heart, I'd love for you to like and subscribe. It's a simple way to stay connected and share these reflections with even more people who might need them.